coffee was getting cold again. Dr. Kim So-young stared at the cup sitting next to her computer screen and sighed. She had been looking at the same data for 3 hours straight. The numbers on her screen showed energy readings from the nearby pulsar star. Something was wrong with them. Research Station Kepler 44b floated in the darkness of space like a tiny metal island. It was the furthest human outpost from Earth. The station was small and quiet. Only 43 people lived and worked there. Most days nothing exciting happened at all. Commander Lee Hyun-woo walked through the main corridor checking on his crew. He was a tall man with kind eyes who had once been a soldier. Now he was a scientist studying stars in space. He liked the peaceful life on the station. No wars to fight. No enemies to worry about. Just the beauty of the universe to explore. The station had 3 main sections. The living area where people slept and ate. The research labs where they studied samples and ran experiments. And the operations center where they controlled the station and talked to Earth. Large. Windows showed the spinning pulsar star in the distance. It looked like a lighthouse beacon flashing in the cosmic dark. Dr. So-young was the station's expert on alien life forms. She had studied biology on Earth for many years before coming to space. Her job was to look for signs of life in the star system. So far, she had found nothing but rocks and gas clouds. But today her instruments were showing something different. The energy patterns from the pulsar were changing. They had been steady for months. Now they were jumping up and down in ways that made no sense. So-young had checked her equipment twice. Everything was working fine. The strange readings were real. Park Min-ho was So-young's assistant. He was young and smart, but sometimes he rushed to conclusions. When So-young showed him the data, he just shrugged his shoulders. "It's probably just interference from the pulsar," Min-ho said while eating his lunch. "Those spinning stars mess up our readings all the time. Remember last month when we thought we found radio signals? It was just the star's magnetic field." But So-young was not convinced. She had been studying space phenomena for 15 years. Her instincts told her these patterns were too regular to be natural. They looked almost like signals. Like someone or something was using the pulsar's energy for communication. The station's defense systems were almost a joke. They had basic shields that could stop small rocks from hitting them. One automated gun turret sat on top of the station. It was designed to shoot asteroids, not enemy ships. Most alien species in the galaxy knew that human research stations were harmless. They studied things. They did not fight wars. Senior technician Choi Dong-min spent his days maintaining the station's equipment. He was an older man with steady hands and a calm voice. Nothing seemed to worry him. He had worked on space stations for 20 years. He had seen equipment break in every possible way and learned how to fix it all. Dong-min's main job was keeping the gravity generators running. Without artificial gravity, everyone would float around like balloons. The generators were old but reliable. They hummed quietly in the lower levels of the station. Most people never thought about them until something went wrong. The station also had a particle accelerator for research. It was a large machine that could speed up tiny particles to incredible speeds. Scientists used it to study how matter behaved under extreme conditions. It was the most advanced piece of equipment on the station. Dr. So-young often used it in her experiments. Communications. Engineer Yoon Ji-hai sat in the operations center, surrounded by screens and blinking lights. Her job was to maintain contact with Earth and monitor space around the station. She was a quiet woman who loved puzzles and complex problems. Keeping the communications running across vast distances was like solving a new puzzle every day. The messages to Earth took 3 weeks to arrive. Messages back took another 3 weeks. This meant conversations were impossible. Instead, the station sent regular reports about their research. Earth sent back supplies, new instructions, and news from home. Life on the station followed a simple routine. People woke up, ate breakfast together in the common room, and went to work. They studied star formation, analyzed rock samples, and measured radiation levels. In the evenings, they gathered to share meals and play games. Some people read books. Others watched old movies from Earth. The food was not exciting, but it was healthy. Everything came from recycling systems or storage containers. Fresh fruits and vegetables were rare treats that arrived on supply ships. Most of the time they ate protein bars, dried foods, and synthetic nutrients that tasted like cardboard. But nobody complained much. They had all chosen this life. They wanted to explore the universe and make discoveries. The isolation and simple living were prices they gladly paid for the chance to push the boundaries of human knowledge. Dr. So-young worked late into the station's artificial night. The energy readings were getting stronger. Whatever was causing them was getting closer to their star system. She tried different ways to analyze the data. She looked for patterns in the timing. She checked the frequencies against known natural phenomena. Nothing matched. These energy signatures were unlike anything in their databases. They were too focused and too purposeful to be random cosmic events. But if they were artificial signals, then who was sending them? Why? The nearest known alien civilization was hundreds of light years away. Most species in this part of the galaxy were peaceful traders and explorers like humans. They had no reason to hide their presence or use secret communications. As So-young saved her work and prepared for bed, she felt a chill of worry. Her scientific training told her to be skeptical of unusual readings. Equipment malfunctioned all the time in space. Radiation from stars could create false signals, but her instincts as a biologist whispered that something was watching. The station windows, the pulsar continued its eternal dance. Every few seconds, it sent out beams of energy that lit up the surrounding gas clouds. It had been spinning for millions of years. Now something was using its power for purposes unknown. The 43 people on research station, Kepler 442b, slept peacefully that night. They had no idea that tomorrow would change everything. They were about to discover that being the most vulnerable outpost in human space meant they were also the most important target in the darkness between the stars. Massive shapes moved closer. The hunt was about to begin. The alarm started screaming at 6 a.m. station time. Senior technician Choi Dongmin was drinking his first cup of coffee when his instruments went crazy. The screens showed massive gravitational waves rolling through space like invisible tsunamis. Something huge was coming. Dongmin ran to the main operations center, calling for Commander Hyeon-woo. Within minutes, the entire crew was awake and rushing to their stations. Dr. Kim. So-young arrived, still wearing her sleeping clothes but carrying her data tablets. The energy readings she had been tracking were now off the charts. "What are we looking at?" Commander Hyeon-woo asked as he studied the sensor displays. His military training was kicking in. Even though he had been a peaceful researcher for years, his instincts still worked. 16 ships just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of our system, communications engineer Yoon Ji-hai reported. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly as she worked her controls. "They're big. Really big. The largest ones are reading as heavy dreadnought-class vessels. Through the main viewing windows, they could see nothing but stars and the spinning pulsar. The enemy fleet was too far away to see with human eyes. But the sensors told a frightening story. 12 heavy cruisers and 4 massive dreadnought battleships were moving toward their small research station park. Minho pulled up identification databases, trying to match the ship signatures. After several minutes of searching, he found what he was looking for. His face went pale as he read the information. "They're Valak ships," Minho announced to the room. The Valak hegemony is a military empire from the other side of the galaxy. They conquer star systems and take resources. They're known for being ruthless in battle. Dr. So-young felt her stomach drop. The Valak were legendary for their violence. They had destroyed entire civilizations that got in their way. What did they want with a small research station? There was nothing here worth conquering except rocks and gas clouds. "Commander." Hyeon-woo ordered a full sensor sweep of the approaching fleet. The results were terrifying. Each heavy cruiser carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The dreadnoughts could probably crack planets in half. Against them, the research station had one small defensive turret and basic shields. "Can we run?" asked Dr. Lim Yuna, who served as the station's medical officer. She was a practical woman who believed in avoiding danger when possible. Maintenance Chief Han Seok-jin shook his head sadly. Our transport ship can only carry 20 people. Even if we started loading right now, we couldn't get everyone off the station. And it would take 3 weeks to reach the nearest human settlement. The mathematics were simple and brutal. They had 43 people in one small ship. The Valak fleet would reach them in hours, not weeks. There was nowhere to run and no time to evacuate everyone. Communications engineer. Ji-hai tried sending emergency signals toward human space. Maybe a military patrol would receive the message and come to help. But the nearest human fleet was months away, even at maximum speed. By the time help arrived, there would be nothing left to rescue. The Valak fleet maintained perfect formation as it moved through the star system. Their ships were dark and angular, like predatory sharks swimming through an ocean of stars. Sensor readings showed they were scanning everything in the system, looking for valuable resources. High Admiral Kethvar commanded the Valak fleet from his flagship dreadnought called the Dominator. He was an experienced warrior who had conquered dozens of star systems for the hegemony. To him, this mission was routine. A small human outpost stood between his fleet and the rare heavy elements they needed from the pulsar system. The Valak had detected massive deposits of exotic matter around the spinning star. These materials were essential for building their most advanced weapons. The human research station was just an annoying obstacle to be swept away quickly and efficiently. At noon station time, a message arrived from the Valak fleet. Commander Hyanwoo played it on the main speakers so everyone could hear. The voice was harsh and mechanical, speaking through a translation device. Human station. You are trespassing in territory claimed by the Valak hegemony. You have 6 hours to evacuate this system completely. After that time, all human presence will be eliminated. This is your only warning. The message ended with a click, leaving the operations center in heavy silence. Everyone looked at Commander Hyanwoo, waiting for orders. He had been a military officer once. If anyone could find a way out of this situation, it would be him. But Hyanwoo knew the truth. 16 warships against 1 research station was not a fight, it was an execution. The Valak were giving them 6 hours out of professional courtesy, not because they feared any resistance. Dr. So-young studied the sensor readings of the approaching fleet. Her scientific mind was working on the problem, even as fear filled her heart. The Valak ships were using quantum shield technology to protect themselves. Their weapons were plasma cannons and particle beams designed to destroy heavily armored targets. We need to think about this differently, So-young said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. She was staring at the data from her pulsar research with intense concentration. What do you mean? Asked Haeon-Woo. The Valak are expecting us to fight them like a military target. Shields against shields. Weapons against weapons. But we're not a military station. We're scientists. We study things they don't understand. Park Min-ho caught on first. You're talking about the exotic matter research? The particle accelerator experiments? So-young nodded slowly. For 3 months we've been studying how the pulsar's magnetic field affects subatomic particles. We've discovered interactions that shouldn't be possible according to normal physics. What if we could weaponize those interactions? The idea was insane. They were talking about turning a scientific instrument into a weapon of war. The particle accelerator was designed to create tiny amounts of exotic matter for research purposes. It had never been tested as anything more dangerous than a very expensive microscope. Maintenance? Chief Seok-jin stepped forward. Even if we could modify the accelerator, what would we shoot at them? Exotic particles dissipate in space within microseconds. They'd never reach the Valak ships, not unless we focus them through the pulsar's magnetic field. So-young replied. The star's rotation creates focused beams of energy every few seconds. If we timed it right, we could use the pulsar itself as part of our weapon system. The room fell, silent as everyone tried to understand what she was suggesting. They would turn their research station into something that had never existed before, a facility that could weaponize the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Commander Hyanwoo looked around the room at his crew. They were scientists and engineers, not soldiers. But they were also human beings facing extinction. Sometimes ordinary people had to do extraordinary things just to survive. How long would it take to modify the equipment? He asked. Han Seok-jin thought carefully before answering. If we cannibalize half the station's systems for parts, maybe for hours, but I can't guarantee it won't explode when we try to fire it. Better to die fighting than die running, Hyenwoo said firmly. Let's get to work. The crew scattered to their tasks, knowing they were attempting the impossible. Outside the station windows, the Valak fleet continued its approach. Confident that victory was assured, they had no idea they were about to face humanity's most dangerous characteristic: the ability to turn knowledge into weapons and desperation into determination. The research station turned into a battlefield of frantic activity. Dr. Kim So-young ran between computer screens calculating equations that had never been tested before. Her fingers flew across keyboards as she tried to figure out how to turn exotic particles into weapons of war. The mathematics were incredibly complex. She needed to predict exactly how particles would behave when fired through the pulsar's magnetic field. One small mistake in her calculations would mean certain death for everyone on the station. The pressure was crushing, but she forced herself to stay focused. Maintenance Chief Han Seo-jin was already tearing apart the station's equipment. He had teams of technicians removing power cables from life support systems and rerouting them to the particle accelerator. They needed every bit of electrical power the station could generate. We're going to need the emergency backup generators too, Seo-jin called out to his crew. Shut down heating in the living sections. Turn off the artificial gravity in areas we don't need. Everything goes to the weapon system. The particle accelerator sat in the heart of the research section. It was a beautiful machine built for peaceful discovery. Now, they were turning it into humanity's most desperate weapon. Seo-jin's teams welded new focusing arrays onto the accelerator's output ports. They had no blueprints for what they were building. They were inventing it as they worked. Communications engineer Yoon Ji-hai monitored the approaching Valak fleet. The alien ships were taking their time moving through the star system. They were scanning for resources and mapping the area for future mining operations. To them, the human research station was just a minor inconvenience to be dealt with. Later, they're being very casual about this, Ji-hai reported to Commander Hyenwoo. The fleet is maintaining standard exploration formation. They don't consider us a threat at all. This was exactly what Hyenwoo had hoped to hear. The Valak's confidence was humanity's only advantage. If the aliens expected serious resistance, they would attack from maximum range with overwhelming firepower. Instead, they were approaching like predators stalking helpless prey. Park. Minho was working with So-young on targeting calculations. The pulsar's magnetic field rotated every 11 minutes, creating windows of opportunity. When the field lines aligned perfectly, they would get one chance to fire their improvised weapon. If they missed the timing, they would never get another. Opportunity. The field intensity peaks at exactly 7 minutes and 33 seconds into each rotation cycle, Minho announced. That gives us a firing window of maybe 15 seconds before the alignment shifts. Dr. So-young nodded without looking up from her equations. 15 seconds to save 43 lives. No pressure at all. The weapon modifications were taking longer than expected. Several critical components failed during testing, forcing Seo-jin's teams to find alternative solutions. They were building something that had never existed before, using equipment designed for completely different purposes. The power couplers keep burning out, Seo-jin reported with frustration. The particle accelerator was never meant to handle this much energy. We're pushing it beyond every safety limit. Then we build better couplers, Commander Hyenwoo replied firmly. Use whatever materials you need. Strip parts from other systems if you have to. We only need this thing to work once. As the hours passed, the station began to look like a war zone. Corridors were filled with cables and equipment panels. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls. The air recycling systems were working overtime to clear smoke from welding operations. Dr. Lim Yuna set up a medical station near the main operations center. She knew that exotic particle radiation was extremely dangerous to humans. When they fired their improvised weapon, The entire crew would be exposed to radiation levels that could be fatal. She prepared radiation medicine and emergency treatment. Supplies. Even if this works, we're all going to get sick, she warned Commander Hyan-Woo. Exotic particles don't behave like normal radiation. I'm not sure our medical equipment can treat the effects. We'll deal with radiation. It's poisoning if we survive the next few hours, Hyan-Woo replied. Focus on keeping everyone alive long enough to fire the weapon. The Valak fleet was now only 2 hours away from optimal weapons range. High Admiral Kethvar was growing impatient with his leisurely approach. The human station had not responded to his ultimatum or shown any signs of evacuation. It was time to demonstrate the consequences of defying the Valak hegemony. Senior Technician Choi Dongmin was monitoring the enemy fleet's approach when he noticed something interesting. The Valak ships were following predictable patrol patterns as they moved through the system. Their formation was designed for maximum sensor coverage, not maximum defensive strength. Commander, Dongmin called out. The Valak are positioning themselves perfectly for our attack. They're spreading out to scan the entire system, but that puts them right in the pulsar's primary magnetic field lines. Sa Young looked up from her calculations with excitement. That's exactly where we need them. If they maintain that formation when we fire, the exotic particle beam will hit multiple targets simultaneously. The weapon modifications were finally complete. The particle accelerator had been transformed into something that looked like a science fiction movie prop. Cables snaked everywhere, connecting jury-rigged components that had never been designed to work together. Warning lights blinked red, indicating dangerous power levels. This is either going to be humanity's greatest triumph or our most spectacular failure, Seochin said as he ran final system checks. The focusing array is stable. Power flow is within acceptable limits, barely. We're as ready as we're ever going to be. Commander Hyan-Woo gathered his crew in the main operations center. Through the viewing windows, they could see the distant flashes of the Valak fleet's engines as the alien ships continued their approach. In less than an hour, they would be close enough to destroy the research station with a single volley. I want everyone to understand what we're attempting. Hyan-Woo addressed his people. We're going to try something that has never been done before. We're going to use our research equipment to fight a fleet of warships. The odds of success are virtually zero. He paused and looked around at the faces of his crew. These were scientists and engineers, not soldiers. But they were also human beings with the courage to face impossible odds. However, Hyan-Woo continued, humans have a long history of achieving the impossible when our survival depends on it. Today, we either make history or become history. Either way, we face it together. The crew returned to their stations with grim determination. Outside the research station, the Valak fleet moved closer, confident that victory was assured. They had no idea they were about to encounter humanity's most dangerous characteristic: the refusal to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. At 14:32 station time, the Valak fleet entered weapons range. High Admiral Kethvar sat in his command chair aboard the massive dreadnought. Dominator watching the small human research station on his main screen. To him it looked pathetic and defenseless, floating alone in the darkness of space. Begin intimidation bombardment. Kethvar ordered his weapons officer. Standard procedure: a few warning shots to show them how hopeless their situation is. They will surrender quickly once they see our power. The first Valak plasma bolts streaked across space like angry red lightning. They struck the research station's outer hull, sending shock waves through the entire structure. Emergency alarms began screaming as atmosphere started venting from damaged sections. Commander, Hyan-Woo felt the station shake under the impact. He gripped his command chair and watched damage reports flowing across his screens. The Valak were not even trying to destroy them yet. These were just warning shots to demonstrate their overwhelming superiority. Return fire with the defensive turret, Hyan-Woo ordered. It was a meaningless gesture, but he wanted the Valak to see some resistance. The station's single automated gun opened fire, sending pathetic energy bolts toward the enemy fleet. The defensive turret's shots splashed harmlessly against Valak shields like raindrops hitting armor plating. Several alien officers laughed at the futile display. The humans were fighting back with equipment designed to shoot asteroids, not warships. Communications. Engineer Yoon Ji-hai was intercepting Valak radio transmissions. The alien commanders were treating this like a training exercise for their junior officers. They were taking turns firing at the research station to give everyone practice with live targets. "They're playing with us," Ji-hai reported with anger in her voice. "This isn't even a real battle to them. We're just target practice." Dr. Kim So-young was focused entirely on her targeting calculations. The pulsar's magnetic field was building toward peak intensity, but the timing had to be perfect. Fire too early, and the exotic particles would disperse uselessly. Fire too late, and there would not be enough station left to operate the weapon. 6 minutes until optimal firing window, So-young announced. Her voice was steady, but sweat was running down her face. Everything depended on her mathematics being correct. 43 lives balanced on equations that existed at the edge of theoretical physics. The Valak heavy cruisers began moving into attack formation. They were spreading out to maximize damage coverage when they began their real assault. High Admiral Kethvar wanted to destroy the research station efficiently, but thoroughly. No human presence could be allowed to remain in this star system. Maintenance Chief Han Seo Chin was monitoring the modified particle accelerator from the engineering section. The exotic matter containment fields were holding steady, but the power levels were climbing toward dangerous limits. They were pushing equipment far beyond its design specifications. Power flow is approaching critical levels. Seo Jin reported over the communication system. "The containment fields are stable for now, but I can't guarantee how long they'll hold under this stress." Park Min-ho was tracking the Valak fleet positions on his sensor displays. The alien ships were moving exactly where Dr. So-young's calculations predicted they would be. The enemy's tactical doctrine was working in humanity's favor. For once, target formation is optimal. Min-ho called out. All 12 heavy cruisers are positioned in the primary magnetic field lines. The dreadnoughts are slightly outside the zone, but still within effective range. Commander Hyan-woo watched the countdown timer on his screen. 4 minutes until the weapon could fire. The Valak were taking their time, systematically damaging the station's outer hull. They wanted to cripple the research facility slowly before delivering the killing blow. More plasma bolts struck the station, sending violent tremors through the structure. Several secondary explosions erupted in the lower levels as damaged systems overloaded. Dr. Lim Yuna was treating crew members injured by flying debris and electrical burns. Hull integrity is down to 60%. Senior Technician Choi Dong-min reported, "We're losing atmosphere in sections 4 through 7. Emergency bulkheads are holding, but barely. The research station was slowly being torn apart around them. Warning lights flashed red throughout every corridor. Emergency power had kicked in as main systems failed one by one. They were running out of time, and the Valak knew it. High Admiral Kethvar was growing bored with the slow destruction. The human station was proving more durable than expected, but it was clearly doomed. Time to end this tedious exercise and move on to more important matters. Prepare for final bombardment," Kethvar ordered. "Target their power core. I want this finished quickly." The Valak dreadnoughts began charging their main weapons. These massive plasma cannons could vaporize entire city blocks with a single shot. Once they fired, there would be nothing left of the research station but expanding clouds of superheated gas. 2 minutes to optimal firing window, Dr. So-young announced. Her calculations were complete. The exotic particle beam would fire along the pulsar's magnetic field lines exactly when the enemy fleet reached perfect positioning. If her mathematics were correct, the results would be spectacular. Commander Hyan-woo made his final decision. They could wait for the perfect moment and risk being destroyed before they could fire. Or they could shoot early and hope for partial success. It was the hardest choice he had ever made. "All stations prepare for weapons discharge," Hyan-woo commanded. "Power to maximum. This is our only chance." The modified particle accelerator began its final charging sequence. Every light on the research station dimmed as electrical power flowed into the exotic matter focusing arrays. Deep in the station's heart, particles began accelerating to impossible velocities. Dr. So-young watched her readouts with intense concentration. The magnetic field alignment was not quite perfect yet, but it was close enough. They would get one shot at saving 43 human lives. Everything they had worked for came down to the next few seconds. 30 seconds to firing, she called out. The Valak dreadnoughts completed their targeting solutions. 4 massive plasma cannons swiveled toward the crippled research station. High Admiral Kethvar raised his hand, ready to give the order that would end this pathetic display of human defiance. 15 seconds to firing, So-young announced. Commander. Hyenwu gripped his command chair and whispered a prayer to whatever gods watched over desperate humans in impossible situations. Around him, his crew waited with the calm courage of people who had already accepted their fate. 10 seconds. The pulsar's magnetic field reached peak intensity. Invisible lines of force stretched across space like cosmic highways carrying energies that could power entire civilizations. The research station's improvised weapon locked onto its targets. 5 seconds. High Admiral Kethvar opened his mouth to order the final attack. The human resistance had been amusing, but now it was time to finish the job. His weapons officers waited for the command to fire. Fire, Commander Hyenwu ordered. The universe held its breath for one perfect moment. Then the impossible happened. Humanity's most desperate gambit became its greatest triumph. The exotic particle beam fired at exactly 14:37 station time. Dr. Kim. So-young watched her instruments as the weapon discharged energy levels that should not have been possible from a research facility. The particle accelerator screamed like a tortured machine as it pushed beyond every safety limit. What happened next would be studied by military scientists for generations. The exotic particles traveling at near light speed hit the pulsars, magnetic field lines, and underwent a transformation that violated known physics. Instead of dispersing harmlessly, the particles became focused into a coherent beam of destructive force. The beam struck the lead Valak heavy cruiser first. For a microsecond, nothing seemed to happen. Then the ship's quantum shields began to behave in ways that defied understanding. Instead of deflecting the exotic particles, the shields absorbed them and began converting their own defensive energy into something deadly. High Admiral Kethvar watched in stunned disbelief as his flagship's sensors registered impossible readings. The quantum signatures from the lead cruiser were fluctuating wildly. Something was interfering with the fundamental structure of matter itself. The first Valak ship simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed in the normal sense of explosions and debris, the exotic particles had unraveled the quantum bonds holding the vessel together at the subatomic level. Where a mighty warship had cruised confidently toward victory, there was now only a cloud of elementary particles expanding into space. The beam continued its path through the Valak formation. Ship after ship encountered the same impossible fate. Their quantum shields, which had protected them from conventional weapons, became instruments of their own destruction. The exotic particles turned their defensive systems against them. Communications. Engineer Yoon Ji-hai intercepted frantic radio transmissions from the surviving Valak ships. The alien commanders were screaming questions that had no answers. Their tactical computers could not process data that violated every known law of physics. What happened to the Sword of Victory? One Valak captain demanded over the radio. It just disappeared from our sensors. The humans have some kind of quantum disruptor weapon, another voice replied with panic. Our shields are useless against it. In 37 seconds, 12 heavy cruisers had been reduced to expanding clouds of subatomic particles. The most powerful fleet the Valak hegemony had assembled in decades was being destroyed by a research station that should not have been able to fight back. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The modified particle accelerator had never been designed to channel such enormous energies. Deep in the research station's heart, the exotic matter containment fields began to collapse. Deadly radiation started flooding through the lower levels. Maintenance Chief Han Seok-jin was in the engineering section when the containment failure began. He felt the radiation hitting his body like invisible fire burning through his cells. Emergency alarms screamed warnings as radiation levels climbed to lethal concentrations. Containment breach in the particle accelerator core. Seogin reported over the communication system. His voice was steady despite the pain shooting through his body. Sealing emergency bulkheads. Now. The weapon is offline. Dr. Lim Yuna rushed to the medical station as radiation detectors throughout the station began sounding alerts. Several crew members in the research section had been exposed to exotic particle radiation during the weapon discharge. She knew from her training that this type of radiation exposure was usually fatal. Dr. So-young was among the most severely affected. She had been stationed in the primary laboratory during the firing sequence to monitor the exotic particle interactions. Now she was dying from radiation poisoning, but she continued working frantically on her calculations. The weapon won't fire again, So-young told Commander Haein-woo as Medical Officer Yuna tried to treat her injuries. The containment system is completely destroyed. But I've discovered something important in the targeting data. The 4 surviving Valak dreadnoughts were retreating toward the edge of the star system. High Admiral Kethvar had never experienced a defeat like this in 20 years of military service. A research station had somehow deployed weapons technology that, as scientists said, was impossible. But their retreat path would bring them through another zone where the pulsar's magnetic field could focus exotic particles. If the humans could somehow fire a second time, they might be able to destroy the remaining enemy ships. The dreadnoughts will pass through. Optimal targeting range in 8 minutes, So-young explained weakly. If we can get the accelerator running again, we can finish them off. Commander Haein-woo studied the damage reports flowing across his screens. The particle accelerator was completely destroyed. The exotic matter containment system had suffered catastrophic failure. Half the research station was flooded with deadly radiation. How do we fire without a containment system? Haein-woo asked. Han Seok-jin's voice came over the communication system from the sealed engineering section. We channeled the station's emergency power cord directly into the accelerator assembly. No safety systems. No containment fields. Just raw energy focused through whatever's left of the targeting array. Everyone understood what this meant. A second firing would create a feedback loop that would destroy the entire research station. The emergency power core would detonate, turning the facility into an expanding ball of superheated plasma. It was a suicide mission. Park Min-ho was already working on the targeting calculations for the retreating dreadnoughts. The magnetic field alignment will be perfect in 6 minutes. But someone needs to maintain power flow manually during the firing sequence. The automated systems are too damaged to handle the energy levels. Commander Haein-woo looked around at his crew. They were scientists and engineers who had signed up to study the universe, not to die in glorious battle. But they were also human beings who understood that sometimes sacrifice was necessary to protect others. The Valak ships will escape if we don't stop them, Haein-woo said quietly. They'll report back to their empire about our weapon technology. The hegemony will send fleets to attack every human colony in this sector. Millions of people will die. The mathematics of sacrifice were simple and brutal. 43 lives to save millions. The research station crew had never expected to become heroes, but fate had given them no choice. Senior Technician Choi Dong-min volunteered to coordinate the manual power flow from the emergency core. Communications Engineer Ji-hai would handle targeting data transmission. Dr. So-young would provide final calculations. Despite her radiation injuries, we're really going to do this, Park Min-ho said with a mixture of fear and determination. We're going to turn ourselves into a weapon. Outside the crippled research station, the 4 Valak dreadnoughts continued their retreat. High Admiral Kethvar was broadcasting emergency signals to the Hegemony Fleet Command, reporting the impossible defeat. He had no idea that the humans were preparing one final desperate attack. The emergency power core began building toward critical levels. Warning systems throughout the station screamed alerts about imminent reactor breach. Commander Haein-woo watched the countdown timer, knowing that each second brought them closer to their moment of ultimate sacrifice. 2 minutes to optimal firing window, Dr. So-young announced. Blood was running from her nose and her hands were shaking from radiation sickness, but her voice remained steady. The Crew of Research Station Kepler-44 to be prepared to write their names in history with letters of fire and sacrifice. They had come to the edge of space to study the mysteries of the universe. Instead, they had discovered the greatest mystery of all, what humans would do when their survival depended on the impossible. Dr. Kim So-young used her last minutes of life to complete the most important calculations in human history. The exotic radiation was destroying her cells from the inside, but her mind remained sharp and focused. She transmitted her final targeting data to the weapon systems, knowing she would never see the results. The second exotic particle beam required perfect precision. Unlike the first shot, which had targeted a spread formation, the remaining Valak dreadnoughts were clustered together for mutual protection. The particle stream would need to be focused into a much tighter beam to achieve maximum effect. Targeting solution complete, So-young announced weakly. The beam will hit all 4 ships simultaneously if we fire at exactly 14, 13, 9, and 22 seconds. Any deviation, and they'll escape. Commander Lee Hyun-woo coordinated the final preparations from the main operations center. Half his crew was dead or dying from radiation exposure. The research station was falling apart around them, but they had one last chance to complete their impossible mission. Maintenance. Chief Han Seo-gin sealed himself inside the reactor core compartment. Someone had to maintain manual control of the power flow during the firing sequence. The feedback from the emergency core would kill him instantly, but his sacrifice would ensure maximum weapon effectiveness. Power levels approaching critical. SE Okajin reported over the communication system. I can hold the flow steady for maybe 30 seconds after firing begins. After that, the reactor goes into cascade failure and takes the whole station with it. The 4 Valak dreadnoughts were moving through the optimal targeting zone exactly as Dr. So-young had predicted. High Admiral Kethvar was still trying to understand how his fleet had been destroyed by a research station. His tactical computers had no explanation for weapons that violated fundamental physics. Senior Technician Choi Dong-min was coordinating the power distribution from his damaged control station. Cables sparked around him as electrical systems overloaded. Emergency lighting cast red shadows on smoke-filled corridors, where dying humans prepared for their final act of defiance. 15 seconds to firing window, Park Min-ho announced. He was handling the final targeting adjustments with hands that shook from radiation sickness. Blood ran from his eyes, but his voice remained steady. Communications. Engineer Yoon Ji-hai transmitted a last message toward human space. It would take weeks to reach the nearest settlement, but someday, people would know what happened at Research Station Kepler-44 to be. The 43 scientists who turned knowledge into weapons and desperation into victory. This is Research Station Kepler-44 to be. Final transmission. Ji-hai spoke into her microphone. We are engaging a superior enemy force with experimental weapons. If you receive this message, remember that humans do not surrender. We find a way to win, or we die trying, Commander. Hyun-woo gripped his command chair and watched the countdown timer reach 0. Everything they had worked for came down to this moment. 43 lives against 4 dreadnoughts. Science against military might. The impossible against the inevitable. Fire. Hyun-woo ordered. The emergency power core discharged its entire energy reserve in one catastrophic burst. The exotic particle beam that emerged from the crippled research station carried enough focused energy to power a small star. It lanced across space at the speed of light, seeking targets that had no idea death was coming. The beam struck the first Valak dreadnought and began the same quantum dissolution process that had destroyed the heavy cruisers. But this time, the exotic particles were more highly concentrated. Instead of taking seconds to unravel the ship's molecular structure, the process was almost instantaneous. High Admiral Kethvar watched his flagship's hull begin to glow with impossible energies. The quantum shields that should have protected them were accelerating their destruction. His last coherent thought was wondering how humans had learned to weaponize the fundamental forces of reality itself. The 4 dreadnoughts dissolved into clouds of elementary particles within 3 seconds of beam contact. The most powerful warships in the Valak fleet simply ceased to exist, leaving no trace except expanding waves of exotic energy that would puzzle scientists for decades. But victory demanded its price. The emergency power core detonated exactly as Han Seo-Kajin had predicted. The feedback explosion tore through the research station's structure like a nuclear fire, consuming everything in its path. Hull plates vaporized. Corridors filled with plasma. The entire facility became a brief new star visible across multiple star systems. Maintenance Chief, Seokjin, died at his post maintaining power flow until the final microsecond. His sacrifice ensured that the exotic particle beam achieved maximum focusing just before the reactor exploded. Even in death, he was solving engineering problems that had never existed before. Research Station, Kepler, for 42b, became an expanding sphere of superheated gas and exotic particles. Where humanity's most remote outpost had once orbited the pulsar, there was now only debris and radiation signatures that would confuse alien scientists for generations to come. The Valak hegemony received the automated distress signals from their destroyed fleet several hours later. High Command could not believe the reports. An entire battle group had been annihilated by a research station using weapons that should not have been possible to build or deploy the few automated probes that survived. The battle carried sensor data that Valak scientists would study for decades without understanding. The exotic particle interactions recorded in those final moments represented physics that their civilization was centuries away from comprehending. From humanity's perspective, the Battle of Kepler 44b became a turning point in their expansion across the galaxy. Dr. So-Young's research data, transmitted in the station's final moments, led to development of exotic matter weapons technology that gave human space forces a decisive advantage in future conflicts. The 43 researchers, who died in 7 minutes of impossible combat, were remembered as heroes throughout human space. Streets and starships carried their names. Military academies taught courses on their tactical innovations. Children learned about the scientists who turned curiosity into courage. Commander Hyenwoo's final transmission became humanity's rallying cry in the wars that followed. We came here to study the universe. We learned how to break it instead. The words were inscribed on monuments across a dozen star systems where humans had achieved victory through determination and ingenuity. The Valak hegemony, faced with evidence that humans could turn research stations into fleet killing weapons, reconsidered their expansion plans in human space. Throughout the galaxy, other species began to view humanity differently. Not as weak newcomers, but as the race that had weaponized scientific curiosity itself. Research Station Kepler 44b had been Earth's most vulnerable outpost on the edge of known space. In death, it became the foundation of humanity's reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous defenders. The species that refused to accept defeat and found victory in impossible circumstances. The outpost that was meant to study the mysteries of the universe had instead revealed the greatest mystery of all: what humans would accomplish when survival demanded the impossible. The answer, written in exotic fire across the darkness between stars, was simple and terrifying. Anything they had to, the battle had. It lasted only 7 minutes. The legend would endure forever. 5 years after the Battle of Kepler 44b, the galaxy was a different place. The story of 43 human researchers who destroyed an entire Valak fleet had spread to every corner of known space. What had begun as a desperate last stand had become the foundation of humanity's reputation among the stars. The Valak hegemony never recovered from the loss of their most powerful battle group. High Admiral Kethvar and his entire fleet had simply vanished while attacking what should have been a helpless research station. The few automated probes that survived carried sensor data that Valak scientists still could not explain. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in the Memorial Hall on New Geneva Station, reading the names carved into black marble. 43 heroes who had turned scientific equipment into weapons of war. She was the lead researcher on Project Pulsar, the military program. that had grown from Dr. Kim So-young's final calculations. The exotic matter weapons technology, recovered from the research station's last transmission, had revolutionized human space defense. Every major colony now had particle accelerators capable of generating focused exotic beams. The weapons were incredibly difficult to build and maintain, but they gave humanity a decisive edge against any enemy. The equations still don't make complete sense, Rodriguez told her assistant as they studied the memorial displays. Dr. So-young was working with theoretical physics that we're only beginning to understand. She created a weapon system that shouldn't have been possible with their equipment. The memorial hall was filled with artifacts recovered from the battle site, twisted metal fragments that had somehow survived the station's destruction, computer memory cores containing Dr. So-young's research data, personal items that told the story of ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things. Commander Sarah Chun of the Human Space Defense Force visited the memorial every year on the anniversary of the battle. Her great-uncle had served under Lee Hyun-woo during the final days of the research station. She had grown up hearing stories about the 7-minute battle that changed everything. They were scientists, not soldiers. Chen explained to the group of young officers she had brought to see the memorial. But when their survival depended on it, they found a way to turn knowledge into weapons. That's what humans do. We adapt. We innovate. We refuse to accept defeat. The Kepler 442 system had been declared a protected memorial by the Galactic Council. No mining or development was allowed near the pulsar where the research station had made its final stand. The exotic particle clouds from the battle still drifted through space, creating beautiful auroras that could be seen from neighboring systems. Alien species throughout the galaxy now approached human territory with careful respect. The race that could weaponize research equipment was not to be underestimated. Several civilizations had requested technology exchanges, hoping to understand how humans developed such innovative military solutions. The Zephyrian Trade Federation had been the first to formally recognize human territorial claims after learning about the Battle of Kepler 4 for to be their ambassador explained the decision to his government in a report that became famous. Throughout diplomatic circles, the humans destroyed 16 Valak warships using a research station, the ambassador wrote. If they can do that with scientific equipment, imagine what they could do with actual weapons. We strongly recommend peaceful relations and mutually beneficial trade agreements. Park Min-ho's younger brother, Jinwoo, had joined the Human Space Defense Force inspired by his brother's sacrifice. He served aboard the heavy cruiser Kepler's Revenge, which carried exotic matter weapons based on Dr. So-young's research. The ship's motto was inscribed below the main display screen. We came to study. We learned to fight. The battle had produced heroes, but it had also created legends that grew larger with each retelling. Throughout human space, children played games recreating the impossible victory. Adults told stories in bars and meeting halls about the day 43 researchers saved humanity from alien conquest. Dr. Lim Yuna had been the only crew member to survive the initial radiation exposure from the first weapon firing. She spent 3 months in a medical facility recovering from exotic particle poisoning. Her survival provided crucial information about treating such injuries, which proved valuable in later conflicts. Now she directed the Han Seo Kajin Memorial Research Institute, where scientists studied exotic matter physics and developed new applications for the technology. The institute's main laboratory was built around a replica of the particle accelerator. It had won humanity's greatest victory. They gave us more than just a weapon, Yuna told her research teams during their weekly meetings. They gave us proof that humans can accomplish anything when survival depends on it. Every experiment we conduct honors their sacrifice. The Valak hegemony had never attempted another attack on human space. Their military doctrine had been completely revised after studying what little data survived from the battle. New protocols required overwhelming force levels and extreme caution when engaging human defensive positions. Several Valak military theorists had written papers analyzing the Battle of Kepler 4 for 2b. Their conclusions were disturbing to hegemony leadership. The humans had not won through superior technology or numerical advantage. They had won through ingenuity and the refusal to accept defeat. The humans weaponized their own research station, one Valak general wrote in a classified analysis. They turned scientific curiosity into military advantage in a matter of hours. Our strategic planning must account for opponents who can create new weapons from existing resources. During active combat, the Pulsar and the Kepler 442 system continued its eternal rotation, sending beams of energy across space every few seconds. Scientists from dozens of species came to study the exotic particle signatures that still lingered from the battle. None could replicate the quantum interactions that had made the impossible victory possible. The research station's final transmission had become humanity's most famous recording. Commander Hyenwoo's words were played at military academies, graduation ceremonies, and diplomatic functions throughout human space. We came here to study the universe. We learned how to break it instead. Young humans across the galaxy chose scientific careers, hoping to follow in the footsteps of the Kepler 442 heroes. Universities reported record enrollment in physics and engineering programs. The researchers who had died defending their outposts had inspired a new generation of scientist-warriors. Dr. Kim So-young's name appeared on research papers published decades after her death. Her final calculations had opened entirely new fields of exotic matter physics. Military contractors and university researchers competed to understand the theoretical frameworks she had developed in the station's last hours. The Memorial Wall and New Geneva stations Hall of Heroes displayed personal messages from the crew's final transmissions. Park Min-ho had sent a brief note to his family. Tell everyone that humans don't quit. We find a way, or we make one. Maintenance Chief Han Seokdin's last words were characteristically practical. The equipment worked perfectly. Mission accomplished. Communications engineer Yoon Ji-hai had transmitted detailed technical specifications for the exotic matter focusing arrays in the minutes before the station's destruction. Her data had enabled human engineers to build the first generation of practical exotic weapons. Military historians considered her contribution as valuable as the battle itself. The Kepler Memorial Foundation established research grants in honor of each crew member who died in the battle. Promising young scientists received funding to pursue advanced studies in exotic physics, theoretical engineering, and space defense technologies. The Foundation's motto reflected humanity's new approach to exploration. Prepare for discovery. Prepare for anything. 20 years after the battle, the galaxy had settled into a new balance of power. Human space continued expanding, but now other civilizations approached with requests for alliance rather than demands for surrender. The species that had turned a research station into a superweap commanded respect. Throughout known space, the exotic matter weapons technology had evolved far beyond Dr. So-young's original designs. Human starships now carried particle cannons that could disable enemy vessels without destroying them. Defensive installations protected major colonies with focusing arrays that made orbital bombardment impossible. But the most important legacy of the Battle of Kepler 442b was not technological. It was the proof that humans could face impossible odds and find victory through determination, innovation, and sacrifice. The 43 researchers had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of when survival demanded the impossible. In the end, they had come to study the stars and learn to break them instead. Their 7 minutes of fury had earned humanity a place among the galaxy's great powers. The most vulnerable outposts had become the foundation of an empire built on ingenuity, courage, and the refusal to accept defeat. The battle was over. The legend had just begun. Far from Earth, in the darkness between stars, a small memorial beacon orbited the Kepler 442 pulsar. Its message repeated endlessly in dozens of languages, telling anyone who would listen about the day humans proved that knowledge was the greatest weapon of all. The researchers had died as heroes. They lived on as legends. And throughout the galaxy, civilizations